My name is Sukhvinder and we are the Fallaciphers. In order to understand what a fallacy is, one must understand what an argument is. A fallacy is well characterized as a false notion or a statement or an argument that has false or invalid conclusions. In other words, wrongness of thinking or certainty. Fallacies are very generally an error in reasoning. It is different from factual errors, which commonly is being wrong on certain facts. Fallacies are very common through all communication and most commonly towards argumentative purposes. Fallacies are false statements that make an argument weak without insufficient evidence or support. They are allocated in two types of groups: fallacies of relevance and fallacies of insufficient evidence. Fallacies of relevance arises when evidence is logically irrelevant to the conclusion. An example of this is appeal to pity. I need to pass this class in order to graduate. If I don't graduate, my parents will kill me. This fallacy shows that the arguer substitutes the direct or implied evidence rather than applying logically irrelevant evidence. The argument may appear to provide some degree of support, but less than complete support for the conclusion. Fallacy of insufficient evidence arises when premises fail to provide support for the conclusion, even though it may not entirely be relevant to the conclusion itself. An example of this would be if X is true because you cannot prove that X is false, and X is false because you cannot prove that X is true. This displays that the premises fails to provide some support for the conclusion, even though it may not entirely be relevant to the argument and conclusion itself. There are numerous different types of fallacies, such as particular, ad hominem, slippery slope, faulty cause, appealing to force, appeal to popularity, just to name a few. Majority of these different types of fallacies have their own type of significance and application. Understanding the general terms of fallacies can improve the way of critical thinking and your argumenting skills.
Hi, my name is Jared, and I'm part of the Philosophers. Fallacies are theories that people have come up with in order to show different styles of dealing with situations. These theories are an important way of understanding a certain thought process. The three fallacies I looked into were slippery slope, appealing to extremes, and faulty cause. These three fallacies are important to understand because they have a lot of good points. Slippery slope shows how a situation could turn into a domino effect. Appealing to extremes shows how someone can take a conclusion to the extreme without even thinking it through. And lastly, faulty cause explains why assuming can have a really rough and unassociated ending. Slippery slope. When a person asserts that some event must inevitably follow from another without any argument for the inevitability of the event in question. That was found by Nizkor. In English, this fallacy is basically stating that if A happens, then eventually B, C, and D will happen too. So it is basically comparing step A, B, C, and D together and stating that if we don't want step D to happen, we shouldn't allow step A to happen either. I think this fallacy is true in a lot of cases. For example, if you don't want to start a war, then don't send troops out to help against someone that you know will want to get their revenge. Slippery slope is also known as the domino/snowball effect fallacy, mainly because it is showing that things happen in relevance to one another. Basically, stating that each step is affected by the step before it. Slippery slope is when the domino/snowball effect usually occurs in a negative situation. For example, if you take action A and it negatively affects action B, which then affects action C, and so on. So you can kind of see how one negatively affected action can turn into a second negatively affected action. Hence the snowball/domino effect. Slippery slope is a very touchy fallacy because it can be used in so many different ways. Not everything in this fallacy is negative, though. It can be used as a positive way of looking at something. For example, because we sent troops to a country, it stopped a war from happening, which then led to a peace treaty between the two countries. So you can see how slippery slope can be positive and negative both ways. Slippery slope and appealing to extremes are very similar because they both use emotion to figure out the reasoning behind why these situations occur. But they differ because slippery slopes look into the sequence of events leading to the extreme, where appealing to extremes does not. That was found by logical.com. Appealing to extremes is stating that if A is true, then B is true. But B is the extreme of A. An example of this fallacy is that telling your dad, you already took my TV away, so why don't you just take my my life away as well? Or when you go out with your girlfriend, you already took my car, so why don't you just break up with her too? The extreme has no relevance to the actual issue, but people will use this kind of fallacy in their argument to try and make it seem like what the person is doing is ruining their life. It is not usually a very effective way of winning an argument. You'll usually see this kind of behavior from a child or someone that over-exaggerates everything that goes on in their life. Someone that uses this style of argument usually feels like nothing is their fault. They have to blame everyone else for their actions. You'll also hear this style of argument come from a politician that is trying to gain an edge on people and, of course, extremists. Usually politicians try to make something sound more extreme than it usually is, and they usually have a reason for it and a solution to the extreme problem. So appealing to extremes, in my opinion, is not a good argument strategy, and mainly because it usually has no relevance to the topic. It just sounds like something more important than it really is. As you can see right here, it's another form or example of appealing to extremes. The dad is saying, I need to know where the two of you are planning on spending the night. And the little girl says, OMG, Dad, why don't you just implant a GPS unit into my neck and track me on OnStar all night? My third and final fallacy was faulty cause. This is the belief in causation, by assuming that because one thing follows another, it is caused by the other. That was found on the list. Faulty cause literally means exactly what it sounds like. It is the action taken in the belief of a false cause. People do this all the time. They will take action in belief that what happened was correct, but really was not. For example, I ate tuna last night, and I didn't like it, so I must hate the taste of all fish in general. Or I saw a car accident happen yesterday, and I got into a car accident today, so it's the car accident that I saw yesterday's fault. Faulty cause is kind of like a negative side to destiny. Like when you feel something was destined to happen to you because you saw some kind of sign earlier in the day or sometime before. During faulty cause, you look back at something that happened before the action you took and try to make it a cause as to what happened to you. And it's always false and untrue. It's never true. One could compare faulty cause to not being true to yourself about what really happened to make the situation occur. I have two more examples of faulty cause. One being I ate a loaf of bread and got a cold a few days later, therefore I must have gotten sick from the loaf of bread. My second example is the first event that happened was ice cream sales increased in May. My second event was shark attacks increased in June. Therefore, I claim that ice cream consumption causes shark attacks. These fallacies all have similar reasoning to dealing with situations, and they're all about jumping to conclusions. Slippery slope is jumping to the conclusion that all steps that someone took are related. Therefore, each step was wrong and the whole situation is wrong. Appealing to extremes is believing that if the first action is true, then the second action is also true. And the second action is the extreme of the conclusion of the first action. And finally, faulty cause jumps to the conclusion of something you saw or heard sometime before and makes it the cause of the situation that happened to you. All three of these fallacies are different and important to keep in mind, mainly because you can now find the false or wrong information in certain situations, arguments, or actions that people in the world take.
My name's Allison Mayhew, and I'm part of the Fallaciphers. When I was researching fallacies, it took me a long time to find some that I thought were worth talking about because there were so many. But then I came across appeals to motives and place of support. These are the fallacies that appeal to our emotions or other emotional and mental factors. So these are the fallacies that aren't providing all the things to help one believe what you are saying. There is appeal to force, where you are told that if you don't agree with what the reader is saying, there will be consequences. Then there is appeal to pity. This is where the reader has to agree because of how pitiful the author or whoever the person talking is. And last but not least, there is appeal to popularity, which I see the most often. This is where the intention is true simply because other people think it's true. Appealing to force is something that I don't see very often. It could be seen in places such as workplaces, your church, in households, wherever basically. It's a type of appeal to consequences. I don't think this should be called an actual argument, since nothing is really being argued about. It is making no evidence for a conclusion. I think it is better explained as someone who is higher in power than you, or something along those lines, deciding what is true and what is not. It's saying that if this isn't your exact thought, then you are wrong, and essentially there will be no consequences. This is a good way to get someone to say that they agree with you, even if they are just saying that they agree with you because there will be consequences. A good example that I saw on the Logical Fallacies website was that if you don't accept the idea of the sun orbiting around the earth rather than the earth orbiting around the sun, you will be excluded from the church. This isn't giving evidence as to why they think the sun orbits the earth, but this is how it is, and it's only a right and wrong. This is why it's appeal by force. And then two examples are, this first one, it says, if you don't forward this to 10 friends, something tragic will happen to you in the next 24 hours. And the next one is appeal to force. Mighty makes right fallacy, uses force, threatens, or unpleasant backlashes. An example is 2 + 2 = 22. Believe that or I'll smash your face. God is not true. If someone here says otherwise, then he shall face his death. You should not publish that. I need to remind you that the board has fired the previous editor for ignoring our orders, and believe me or else you'll fail this course. Next is appeal to pity, which is something that I think I see more often than appeal to force. I'm sure that at some point you have heard someone say something like, it was out of pity. It's so easy to make someone agree or even do something with you because of pity, and I think that people use that as a tool to get people to agree. Appeal to pity is where you are using your pity party in place of an actual claim. According to the NISCOR project, the argument goes like this. P is presented with the intent to create pity, therefore claim C is true. This fallacy and the appeal to consequences, which is also known as ACB, is different from one another because in the ACB fallacy, someone is using beliefs instead of evidence, and in the appeal to pity fallacy, you are using someone's sympathy and emotions. There can be some cases where a claim will actually give someone the feeling of pity. This example that I got from the NISCOR project is pity from an actual claim. The professor says, you missed the midterm, Bill, and then Bill replies with, I know, I think you should let me take the makeup. The professor says, why? Bill says, I was hit by a truck on the way to the midterm. Since I had to go to the emergency room with a broken leg, I think I'm entitled to the makeup. The professor then says, I am sorry, Bill, about the leg. Of course you can make it up. I see this a lot, especially when I was in high school. There are some legit reasons that can make someone feel pity or sorry towards another, such as a family member passing, breaking something, or getting hit by a truck, like the example above. But I think that there is a fine line between purposely making someone feel bad for you to get something and making up a sob story to get what you want. I see this often enough to where I can tell where it's for real or if it's all just an act. Appeal to popularity is another one that I see a lot, whether it be between friends at school, among coworkers, or even family members. It's easy to persuade someone about something by popularity. If there is a majority of people or someone who is popular or upper class that believes something, it's probably going to be held to be true. If Jennifer Aniston says that you should hold your face in a bucket of ice water to help your skin become more beautiful as you age, which she actually does say, It's going to be held as true in most cases because she's a celebrity and is known for having gorgeous, youthful-looking skin. In many societies, people will follow others. So this is actually a really successful way of getting people to follow and accept it, said by Niscor. Appeal to popularity is really similar to appeal to emotion, which is when someone takes advantage of someone's emotions. Appeal to emotion is really common in politics. Like for example, when someone who is running for president says things to make you feel a certain way, which in that case, they want you to feel good about what this person is saying in hopes that you will end up voting for them, said by Niscor. Many people have argued that people's emotions are less reason and more force. Logical argumentation is often difficult and time-consuming, and it really has the power to kick people into action, also said by Niscor. So appeal to popularity and appeal to emotion are both targeting people by getting them to accept the claims based on emotions and other people's thoughts, which is what makes these two fallacies so similar to one another. And then two examples up here are all these people are behind the sign that says bandwagon, and there's one person that's behind the bus stop. And this one says, appeal to popularity, agreeing with the majority by view may well feel comfortable. It may even be safer, but that doesn't make the majority view correct. If your only argument is that X number of people can't be wrong, I'd advise you to think again. History is full of mass stupidity. Don't be just another sheep. Humans have the potential to be much better than that. So all these fallacies are using psychological tools to help persuade someone into believing the same thing as them, without using actual claims. The fallacies can be seen in any environment and are probably happening around us all the time. Once I started researching these, I realized just how easy it is to point one of these out, whether it's in an actual conversation you're having or even just one that you overhear.
Whew! Well, good thing I wore my lucky shirt today. Last time I wore it, I got an A on my last speech. Hi, my name is Chris Kwan, and I am part of the Fallaciphers. And I just committed a fallacy called post hoc ergo propter hoc. But why should we care about fallacies anyways? When are we going to use them? Fallacies are very common throughout all communication, but specifically toward argumentative purposes. Fallacies are essentially false statements, so for all the guys who have girlfriends that are right no matter what, maybe you and I can learn how to disprove our girlfriends using these fallacies, but no promises. There are a numerous number of kinds of fallacies that are used for arguments, but while some may be obscure and unimportant, many of them play a huge role in our communication skills. Here's an example of a fallacy that you can relate to. You cannot tell me how to work out when you do not even work out yourself. This is an example of the fallacy called tu quoque. I will go in depth on how this statement is a fallacy later, since I just wanted to show how some fallacies may have really complicated names but are very simple to understand. Fallacies are very important for effective communication, and people should understand the basic fallacies as this will benefit their argumentative and communication skills. I understand that some people may believe that fallacies are irrelevant and useless, but let's go through some examples to see how fallacies can sound very similar and familiar. Let's begin with the ad hominem fallacy. Ad hominem is Latin for against the person, and is defined as the fallacy of attacking the individual instead of to disprove the truth of the argument, cites philosophy.lander.edu. An example would be, why should we listen to this politician? He's a drunk. Notice how in this example, I completely ignore the politician's argument and attack him directly, when he might actually have a valid argument. The ad hominem fallacy is a unique fallacy and actually has a certain subtype, many subtypes. And I will go into one subtype called the tu quoque. The tu quoque stands for you too. It is Latin, which is also commonly known as the hypocrisy fallacy. The definition of this fallacy, explains Niscor, is when a person claims is false because it is inconsistent with something else the person says or their actions. As you look at the example used, you cannot tell me how to work out when you do not work out yourself. This is example extremes hypocrisy, and a hypocritical person does not win an argument. Another common example would be, Adam, you cannot speak at the Alcohol Anonymous meeting when you're an alcoholic. There are plenty of examples of this fallacy, and now I know that there's a specific term to this statement. Too coquet is very much frowned upon and when committed and should not be used when arguing against a person. Now let's talk about the post hoc ergo propter hoc, or post hoc fallacy for short. This name is translated as after this, therefore because of this. I chose this fallacy because of how often I personally use it. This fallacy essentially is committed when one event causes another simply because the proposed cause occurred before the proposed effect, explains Niscor. Now this is a wordy definition, so let us look at some examples. Jack rode Alex's bike to work. When Jack came back, the bike was broken. Therefore, Jack broke Alex's bike. Now this is not an invalid argument, however, because Jack may have broken Alex's bike, but there's not enough information to be sure. Alex's bike could have been very old, which would have not been Jack's fault because the bike would have broke regardless of the rider. Another example is when I eat a sandwich and then soon get sick after, I immediately blame the sandwich for my illness. Now this is somewhat of a valid argument, however, my sickness could have possibly been because of the sushi I ate the night before. Without all the information, this argument is invalid, even though it may seem like the sandwich caused my sickness. Regarding the fallacy, all of the information is needed as one cannot assume an event from a directly previous one, no matter how sure we may be. Moving on to the next fallacy, which is ad populum. And I do not have, and over here, this fallacy is translated to the people, and is defined as a claim being truly simple because most people are favorably inclined towards the claim, explains Niscor. Essentially, this definition is called the bandwagon fallacy, which makes way more sense than the definition. An example in this is in class participation when the teacher asks a true and false question. When you do not know whether the question is true or false, we tend to look at the majority. This fallacy is very effective when we use properly because people have the desire to be liked and fit in with others. The fallacy is used more commonly to persuade the arguer with the majority. Now an example of this would be, most Asian cultures find it rude to not bow to your elders. Therefore, in Asian cultures, it is rude to not bow to your elders. By this statement, the majority is actually correct. So in some cases, the majority is wrong, but in others, it is correct. And lastly, the fallacy is called equivocation. This fallacy is actually quite interesting to understand because some of the arguments that can be made with this fallacy are very bad. But let's first understand the definition of this fallacy. This fallacy is committed when a key word or a phrase in an argument is used in an ambiguous way, cites texasstate.edu. For example, firefighters are heroes and heroes can fly. Therefore, firefighters can fly. Now, the argument might be valid, but the word hero is ambiguous, which invalidates this argument. Another example is giving money to charity is the right thing to do. So charities have a right to our money. Now, this argument has the ambiguous right, for example, which shows an invalid argument. Equivocation is used during arguments as some individuals use ambiguous words to validate a claim when it is actually invalid. Thus far, we have learned a lot about fallacies. Fallacies are invalid claims that are something to be avoided at all times when arguing against an individual. Understanding the general terms of fallacies can improve our way of critical thinking and your argumentative skills. Everyone should have a general knowledge of a basic fallacy.
We have learned a lot of different types of fallacies and how some fallacies are common to where we have used something very similar in our generation. Fallacies are invalid claims that are something to be avoided at all times when arguing against an individual. Fallacies are very generally an error in reasoning. It is very different from factual errors, which commonly is being wrong on certain facts. It is different. They are very common throughout all the communication and most commonly towards argumentative purposes. Fallacies are very similar to one another and share very similar reasoning. There are numerous of different kinds of fallacies that are used for arguments, and while some may be obscure and important, but many of them play a huge role. Many of these fallacies can be used as a tool towards arguments, and while some may not be. Having general knowledge of fallacies can improve the way you think on your argumentative skills, and everyone should have general knowledge of the basic fallacies.